showing that standardized testing is not an accurate representation of the various learning needs and levels of students in classrooms.
States began to receive funding for standardized testing since the 1960s, when the federal government began requiring states to use standardized tests to assess how well schools were teaching state-chosen curriculum.
According to the Every Student Succeeds Act, every public school is required to have standardized testing.
States receive an allocated amount of money, about $34 to $65 per student for standardized testing a year.
To receive funding for the schools, there must be standardized testing.
Standardized testing is used all over the U.S. to measure students' capabilities, yet only 25% of educators say that state-mandated tests provide useful information for the teachers in their school.
Instead, teachers and students say standardized testing leads to pressure and added stress in the classroom, with nearly 80% of educators saying they feel moderate or a large amount of pressure to have their students perform well in standardized tests.
Standardized testing is administered in elementary, intermediate, and high schools, and at every level, they bring negative effects to students and educators.
In early stages of brain development, a child's intelligence is not able to be correctly identified by standardized testing.
Hands-on learning is a necessity for children this young because at this age, children have very short attention spans.
Children from ages 4 to 9 are not able to be attentive to standardized tests that are long and time-consuming.
When it comes to determining a child's academic development, the best person to judge the developmental and academic abilities is the people who are closest to them.
Educators and other authorities that children are able to look up to can account for all of the other aspects in the classroom, such as verbal reasoning, working memory, processing speed, along with their attention span and social behavior.
Standardized testing, however, is too broad and too general, and there's no personal relation between the students and machinery that grades them.
Children need positive feedback and validation from authorities close to them in order for them to have the motivation to create their best work in the classroom.
Middle schoolers are at the age of development where they're rapidly changing physically, mentally, and emotionally on top of their academic development.
Aside from academics, middle school curriculum is supposed to help these students develop efficient communication skills, self-esteem through assessments and performance, and help develop their creative thinking and critical thinking skills.
Standardized testing is not able to measure these important developmental skills. Standardized testing also fails to recognize the students who demonstrate academic efficiency in other ways aside from reading and writing.
Children's ages 10 to 14 have very short attention spans, and most young students do not learn well and are not able to prove their knowledge by reading and regurgitating.
Some students struggle with reading comprehension but are great kinesthetic, auditory, or visual learners. Standardized testing also fails to recognize the different skills and creativity students possess. Standardized testing does not use real-world application, nor does it test the students on their psychological and emotional development, which is an extremely important part of a child's development at the middle school level.
Students at the high school level take standardized testing similar to that of younger ages, but there are two additional tests to take into note when discussing standardized testing in high schools: the SAT and the ACT.
After the COVID-19 pandemic, many colleges dropped their required test score submissions on college applications. Originally, this was due to academic challenges during the pandemic, but the trend followed in the years after, with 80% of U.S. bachelor degree granting institutions not requiring students to submit either ACT or SAT standardized exam scores in the 2023 to 2024 school year. But why have colleges stopped requiring these scores?
These tests have biased format, biased language, and are imprecise.
Well, what does that mean?
Research shows that a fast-paced, multiple-choice format favors males over females. Males on average have worse grades than females in high school and college, yet because are more likely to guess, they do better on standardized testing.
Standardized tests commonly use idiomatic terms that many test takers are not familiar with, in particular those whose first language is not English, which can cause incorrect answers.
If a student were to retake the ACT without additional studying, they would be likely to have a 1.43 to 2.2 point difference in their scores per scoring sometimes more.
If the ACT or SAT is not administered for free at one's high school, students may not be able to take the test because they can't afford it. The ACT and SAT cost $60 to $100.
Even if a family could afford for their children to take the test once, some families cannot afford for their children to take the test multiple times, an ability that wealthier families can provide for their children. If a child's family can afford for their child to retake the test as many times as possible, they are more likely to get better scores.
There are multiple kinds of assessments that can be used to measure a student's overall development. Formal, informal, formative, and summative assessments teachers can provide throughout the school year to continuously test and record their students' development in all areas. All will provide feedback within days' time.
Informal assessments are simple activities given day to day that are not necessarily recorded by the teacher. This can consist of anything such as read out louds, online academic games, students answering questions, etc.
Formative assessments are assessments given throughout the unit for the teacher to continuously track their progression. Those are exit tickets, quizzes, homework, and worksheets.
Summative assessments are given to evaluate students' learning at the end of a specific unit, period, or standard. This can be in the form of a test, an individual or group presentation, or an individual or group project.
All of these types of assessments provide consistent and relevant feedback, which standardized tests do not always provide.
That these tests don't catch. I think there are better ways to evaluate students, and really, if we are looking for students to become successful adults, we need to actually evaluate and show progress in actually doing things and applying things. And these tests are all about memorization, and you don't really apply anything. Not really.
Do you think standardized testing properly reflects how successful a student is?
Standardized testing provides one measure of a student's performance, but it doesn't fully reflect their overall success or potential. These tests tend to focus on specific skills like memorization and test-taking abilities, rather than critical thinking, creativity, problem-solving, or collaboration, skills that are important for success in real-life situations. Additionally, factors like test anxiety or unequal access to resources can affect test outcomes, making standardized testing an incomplete representation of a student's abilities and achievement.
How do you feel about standardized testing?
I don't think that it's very true of most people's abilities. Students who are really good students and will perform well don't need to show it on the test. And then there's some students who just don't test well no matter what, whether it being anxiety or something else that gets in the way of them being successful.
We want to recognize that not all states require their students to take standardized tests, but many still do. As we mentioned earlier in the video, states give schools an extra $34 to $65 per student in funds each year. This puts districts in a tough position. However, eradicating standardized testing will give our teachers the ability to focus on teaching and serving their children in the most meaningful ways that will progress the development of the child as a whole. And this is what education is really for. Standardized testing only offers our children opportunities to regurgitate and memorize information. In the next clip, we have provided a QR code. Scan the QR code to sign the petition from change.org to end state-funded standardized testing in America. This is not the only way to get involved. It is important to get involved with your local community. Volunteering for your city can open many doors. You could attend a school board meeting, speak up to the school board, or go the extra step and run for school board. It's important for us to not be afraid to speak up, as our future depends on the quality of education provided for our children.